Writing has always felt like praying. Gautama saw the face of his infant son and sleeping wife, shaved his head and beard, put on his yellow robe, and left without saying goodbye. Duties, possessions, ties of the heart, all dust weighing down his soul. He walked and walked, seeking a life wide open, complete and pure as a polished shell. In a cave away from the fray of Mecca, vendettas in a world soured by commerce, Muhammad shook as the words of a new scripture came to him, surrendered himself to its beauty, singing and weeping verse by verse, year by year for 21 years. Of course you remember the man from Galilee who carried on his back the very wood on which his blood was spilled, how he pushed back the rock from the front of the cave and, this is gospel, ascended, emptied of self and full of God, returning now in offerings of bread and wine. I pace back and forth on a cliff above the unknowable, lured by slippery and maverick tales that call forth terror, crack the earth, shatter my bones with light. I have no need to verify old brown marks of stigmata, translate Coptic fragments. A burlap robe on display in the cold stone air of the church of Santa Croce is inscrutable. It tells me only that my body is a ragged garment and will be discarded too. But here, now, I'm ready as a tuned string to witness what is ravenous, mythic. Here I am wholly misbegotten, gossip on the lips of the gods, forgotten by the time the cups are washed and put away. So I start as I start every day, cobbling a makeshift pulpit, casting for truths as they are given me, man, woman, child, sun, moon, breath, tears, stone, sand, sea.
Welcome to the Poet Laureate podcast, a luminous sanctuary for poetry and reflection, recorded at House of Owl on Lekwungen homelands. I'm Kieran Regier, and we just heard Writing Has Always Felt Like Praying by Lorri Neilsen Glenn, who was the first Métis Poet Laureate of Halifax, Nova Scotia. Lorri, that poem just now arrived in our ears, but when did it first begin for you?
That poem began when I was doing a lot of research about loss and grief, and I spent an awful lot of time researching different faith systems, trying to learn about them, trying to broaden my understanding, and probably looking for something close to the sacred. I've never been very religious, but I think there is always something we can learn from various faith systems. And that's what led me to that. And so I wanted just to document that process.
Wow, that's beautiful. Is there something about this poem that continues to teach you even after you've finished writing it?
Well, it does. I think one of the wonderful things about poetry, about writing in general, is that it doesn't matter what is happening to us, what's going on in our own lives, what we might be struggling with or celebrating. There are connections, there are threads that connect us to the larger world, and it's worth the exploration to find out more. You know, we think we are singular, but at some level there's a universality. And to dig and, study and work until you find out what those connections are. It's very rewarding.
Yeah. I kind of feel like some poems feel given and others feel wrestled into being. What was this poem like for you?
Probably a bit of both. I mean, it is true some poems feel given, but they're rare. They're rare. Mostly it's hard digging. It's writing and then writing to clarify and then pulling back and giving giving the poem some distance to breathe so you can separate yourself from it, so you can return to it later and see it with more clarity and see what needs to be done. And like a lot of writing, I find I need to write an awful lot to figure out what it is I'm thinking. I think that's the Forrester quote, the E.M. Forrester quote. How do I know what I think until I see what I say? So I have to write and write and write to figure it out.
And in that process of writing and writing and writing, the poetry that you want to write emerges.
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes it's a bit wobbly, it's a bit wonky, but that's okay. That's part of the process.
Yes. Do you find that poetry is an act of preservation or discovery or something else entirely?
I think all of it. I think all of those. It's certainly a way of learning. Poetry is a way of teaching ourselves an awful lot, and not just the craft, obviously. Teaching us about the world and the connections to the larger world. It's also a way to honor our experience or honor other people's experience, a way to celebrate, a way to praise, a way to acknowledge, a way to document. And as I alluded to in the poem earlier, in some ways it's a form of prayer, maybe a kind of secular prayer.
In the title itself, your writing has always felt like praying. Yeah, I wonder if you can speak to that just a little more.
I think we are all given a way to think deeply about why we are here. And some people do that with music, and some people do it with visual art. There are many ways in which we try to find the reason why we're here. And I just feel grateful that I love words. I love being inside words. I love playing with words, learning from words, exploring, and trying to find a way of expressing what's going on with the words. I don't know who first said it, but someone said that language is a finger pointing to the moon. It's not the moon. It's only a finger pointing to the moon. And in some way, I think we never really are able to put what we feel and what we think into words. The words are never quite accurate, but they're the only, in my case, they're the only tool that I feel really comfortable using to get as close as I can to the meaning.
Beautiful, thank you. Lorri, what does poetry require of you?
Silence. And finding silence can be very difficult. I'm not talking only about the lack of noise. I'm talking about the quiet mind as well, and the time for reflection, and the time to empty out all the scrambling monkeys that are running around in our heads, just so that we can calm down and be receptive.
Do you have your own rituals or your own ways of quieting?
No, not rituals as such. I think I just know that I need quiet, and I need a situation where no one needs me, where I'm not called upon to do anything, that there are fewer obligations. And so then I can find the quiet in order to think. But that sounds quite precious. I mean, it's not as though I'm, I need, a perfect situation. It's just that that's the one most conducive to being able to hold on to a thought without my phone dinging or without, the doorbell ringing, that sort of thing. I find that when I am fully in my head and deep into thought about something, that if I'm distracted by that phone or that doorbell, it takes me some time to get back to that place I was before. Yeah.
Sometimes there's something that gets lost, isn't there, in that gap?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Are there landscapes, voices, or other things that call poetry out of you?
Well, I grew up on the prairies, and the prairies have always called me back. That landscape, the spareness, the small. You feel small under that sky. It's humbling, necessarily humbling, I think. And the same is true by the ocean where I live now, on the Atlantic Ocean. And that's a landscape that always is conducive for me to do some writing. Yeah. It's the spareness, it's the simplicity of it, and it's the awe that it inspires.
Both places kind of call us to be quiet, don't they?
Mm-hmm. They do.
Yeah. Do you think that poetry calls us to that quiet place, to that place where we're trying to figure out, what it is that we're doing here? Do you think poetry calls us there?
I certainly can't speak for anybody else, but it does me.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it does. It causes me to slow down. When I escaped the academy and decided to start writing poetry, I was about 50 years old. And something about poetry is so different from scholarly discourse and all of that kind of language and just the whole culture around that poetry was felt very inviting. It felt as though here's a place I could ask some of the big questions that daunt me, that challenge me, and that I would be in a community comfortable with posing those questions. A community that likes to ask questions we don't normally ask ourselves. Like, what am I doing here? How can I help? What's going on? What should I pay attention to? What matters? Who matters? All of that. And I think in our busy, busy world of, with everything going on, I don't know that we have a chance to do that as much. And to that extent, as I said, I'm not religious. I wouldn't even call myself spiritual necessarily because that's a bit of a odd word nowadays. But it's just maybe getting down to the basics, the basics of being human.
Bring us home to ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Lorri. I would love to invite you to read another poem. But first, I would love to mention that this episode of the Poet Laureate podcast is supported by the generous spirit of Munro's Books, and a literary landmark in downtown Victoria. Munro's has been a sanctuary for readers and writers alike for over 60 years, and their poetry section is unrivaled. And it holds 20 years of memory and meaning for me, and so I want to thank Munro's Books for supporting this time that we have together today. Would you please read us another poem, Lorri?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about poetry. This is a wonderful initiative, and it's not often we get to listen to discussions about poetry. This one is called Blur, and it's published in an online magazine called Juniper. Blur. My feet slip into the old green waders, damp and too large, and I lumber down to the sea in the dim light, because I ache for the sound of it, the shushing and trembling waves that hiss at the toes of my boots, a kind of summoning. Ghosts sidle up, press against me in the chill, millennia of howls and cries and silent boats, dark as stones drifting like sighs toward the bottom, stories clinging to their hulls. An open coffin. I'm never the only company I keep, and the blacker the water, the greater the weight of knowing this. The moon is behind the trees, the sky powdered with ash-white stars. Lately, inside and outside soften, meld, flesh, flora, boots, seaweed, breath, salt, air, slumber. The blur a vessel I enter, alert for the glint of a torch, a sign. Like this, cracked blue cup, caught between rocks, its tumbled edges porous, its handle tethering fingers to all who once gripped it, all I will never know.
Lorri, how has poetry acted as a companion in your life?
That's hard to articulate. Once I began writing poetry, I realized how much it calmed me down, how much it challenged me, how good I felt after having, even if the poem hasn't worked out or even if the writing is difficult, there is something meditative about writing it, and there is something healing in a way of by trying to explore some of the bigger questions. Yeah.
Do you find that poetry dislodges things within you that you didn't know were there, or that you... Yeah.
I think writing always does that for anybody. It's amazing. It doesn't matter what you're writing. You can sit down and, start writing about something, before you know it, you're, 20 years ago and off on a distant shore somewhere. It's amazing what happens when we start writing. And it's a bit of an adventure, too. It's a nice surprise. You never know where you're going to end up. But I think sometimes, too, if there are things bothering you, I think writing can be sort of like the tongue on a sore tooth. It keeps going to the sore tooth, and the writing will go there too eventually if you keep with it.
Yeah. There's a great quote by T.S. Eliot. I'm not going to be able to pull it in, but he talks about removing yourself from the experience in order to create the art. I'm paraphrasing here.
I think that's true. Sometimes we approach poetry because of some emotion, some strong emotion that we are feeling. But in order to really work on the poem and make it something that expresses what we want, we do have to pull back and see it as craft and art and work on it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have one last question for you. And if you could whisper something to an emerging poet, something about courage or craft or voice, what would you say?
I'd say find your kin.
Mm.
Find the kinfolk. Find the poets who inspire you and challenge you. Read widely. And the more you read other poets and read about poetry and write and write and write, the sooner you'll come to an understanding of where you are in the landscape. And I've always said when I'm working with students is find out who you are and then do it on purpose.
Mm. That's awesome. I love it. Thank you, Lorri, for your presence and your words today. Books by Lorri Neilsen Glenn are available at munrosebooks.com for international shipping or at their iconic downtown Victoria storefront, alongside a selection of poetry that invites you to linger, explore voices from across the country and around the world, all gathered under the timeless arches of Munro's Books. Lorri, thank you again. Would you be willing to leave us with a final poem?
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you very much. This is called Wild. All night you hear the birds, hundreds of them restless, erupting, their racket filling the meadow, mocking the mountain, the cold stone calm of the old paperbark tree. What force opens their throats? What promise has been broken? What currents of hope and fear rush through those fragile bones, spring into their eyes, batter blood through the small devices of their hearts? Listen. Nothing lasts. Quiet can be stolen like your bag in the street. You will soon be awake in all the wrong places, your words snatched out of time. Oblivion is a wise old teacher. There is no try. It's all right. You didn't get it until this moment, did you? Wake every chance you can. Join the chorus. Praise the wild. Carry light.